Solo Leveling Season 2, Episode 2, I Suppose You Aren't Aware. The forest inside the Red Gate was a world painted in ice and silence. Snow stretched endlessly, swallowing every sound, every breath, as if the dungeon itself had closed its jaws around the hunters who entered. And in the middle of this stillness stood Sung Jinwoo. The battlefield around him was littered with corpses, massive ice bears, their pale fur stained with blood. Their lifeless eyes stared into the void, but Jinwoo's gaze held steady. With a single motion of his hand, their shadows began to writhe, pulling free from the frozen ground like black smoke. The dead did not remain dead. They rose, silent, obedient, eternal, and joined his ever-growing army. The hunters who followed him could only watch in a daze, whispering among themselves. Each new shadow strengthened Jinwoo, but each also pressed a heavier weight upon his heart. For every step forward, the system demanded he walk further away from what it meant to be human. Meanwhile, outside the gate, time played a cruel trick. Only 3 hours had passed. Wang Dongsu's fists clenched as he paced like a caged beast. His fury burned hotter than the cold around him, especially when he learned of Jinwoo's connection to Manager An. To Huang, this was no coincidence, just another reason to unleash his rage. His anger exploded. He lunged, claws bared, toward An. But Baek Yunho was there, swift and sharp, his own beastly power crackling like a storm. Two S-ranks collided, their blows tearing through the air with a force that could shatter mountains. The earth trembled beneath them. Hunters nearby shielded their faces from the shockwaves, hearts pounding at the thought of being caught between such monsters. Enough! Wu Jinchul's voice cut through the chaos, his presence heavy and commanding. With authority that even S-rankers could not ignore, he forced them apart. Still, Huang's eyes burned with suspicion. An E-rank? Don't make me laugh. That boy is hiding something. But when no proof could be found, his rage lost direction. Snarling, he stormed off, a predator unsatisfied with its kill. Inside the Red Gate, despair was also taking root. Kim Chul, once a proud A-rank hunter, now wandered the frozen forest like a man lost in his own nightmare. His mind cracked under the weight of fear. Everywhere he looked, he saw shadows of death, the butchered remains of ice bears, corpses torn apart within human strength. His heart screamed one truth: the elves were near. And as he stumbled into the warmth of a small campfire, his horror turned into madness. There they were, the low-rank hunters, laughing, eating, smiling, as if this hellish dungeon were nothing but a snowy picnic. To Kim Chul, it was unbearable. Why had his comrades perished while these weaklings lived? What cruel joke of fate allowed them to survive? Rage consumed him. With trembling hands, he drew his blade, eyes wild with hatred. Confess, what did you do? He roared, his voice cracking under the strain. Why are you alive when they are dead? The hunters froze, terror gripping them. Some raised their hands in surrender, others stumbled back, but none could calm him. His blade hovered, ready to spill blood, and then a shadow shifted. Jinwoo emerged like a phantom, his eyes cold, his voice sharper than steel. Enough. Before Kim Chul could even blink, Jinwoo's fist struck. The A-rank collapsed unconscious, his sword clattering uselessly onto the snow. The campfire flickered in silence. No one dared speak. The low-rank hunters looked at Jinwoo not with fear but with awe, as though he were something more than human. But Jinwoo's attention was already elsewhere. The air, it was different. Heavy, watchful. And then he saw them. Figures moved in the corner of his vision, shapes that should not exist. They were invisible, blending perfectly with the snow, yet Jinwoo's instincts screamed of their presence. The Ice Elves. They revealed themselves at last, stepping out of the white curtain like ghosts. Their leader, tall and commanding, bore a cruel smile. His name was Barca. His voice cut through the air like frost. Hand them over, Barca hissed, his eyes glimmering with malice. Give us the humans, and we will let you live. The hunters shivered, but Jinwoo stood unmoved. What startled him was not the threat, it was the words. Because he understood them. The elf's tongue, foreign and inhuman, flowed into his ears like his own language. Shock rippled through him. Why? Why could he hear them? Why could he respond? Still, he did not falter. No. One word. Firm. Unyielding. Barca's smirk twisted into something darker. His army of elves raised their weapons, eager to paint the snow red. And Jinwoo raised his hand. Shadows surged. Soldiers of black steel and fury rose on the ground, their glowing eyes fixed on the enemy. Among them stood Egris, his crimson armor gleaming like fire in the frost. The hunters gasped, some clutching each other, some praying. The battle was inevitable. Barca laughed. Then you will die with them. The forest shook as steel clashed with shadow, and thus began the war beneath the frozen sky. The snowstorm raged, but it was no longer the wind that howled. It was steel against steel, shadows against flesh, life against death. The battlefield was chaos. Jinwoo moved like a phantom, his daggers glinting under the pale light of the frozen moon. Each strike was precise, each step measured, as though the snow itself bent to his will. His shadows followed him, a tide of black warriors that surged against the advancing elves. But Barca, the ice elf leader, was no ordinary foe. His eyes glimmered with cruel intelligence, his strikes slicing through the shadows like shards of ice. He fought not just with strength, but with a purpose. A malice that sought to crush not only Jinwoo's army, but Jinwoo himself. You fight well, Barca hissed, his voice cutting through the storm, but you are not one of us, and you are no human either. What are you? Jinwoo said nothing. His breath came steady, his grip unshaken. The question echoed in his own mind, but he silenced it. This was not the moment to search for answers. This was a moment to survive. Steel rang as Jinwoo's dagger clashed against Barca's blade. Sparks danced in the snow. The force of the blow rattled through his arm, but he did not yield. He twisted, ducked, and struck again, his movements fast as shadows. Yet Barca matched him, step for step, strike for strike. The hunters who had taken cover behind the rocks watched in terrified awe. To them, it was no longer a battle between man and monster. It was something greater, a clash of titans. But not all eyes were fixed on the duel. Kim Chul, the man who had once been an A rank, stood on unsteady feet, his breath ragged, his eyes burning with fury. He had watched long enough. Rage and humiliation gnawed at him like fire. He could not bear it. This boy, this E rank, commanding shadows, fighting like a god, while he, Kim Chul, had been cast aside like nothing. His sword shook in his hand, but he raised it anyway. I'll kill you, he whispered through clenched teeth. I'll kill you, Sung Jinwoo. He charged. But before his blade could even touch flesh, a figure moved. Igris. The Crimson Knight appeared like death itself, his sword plunging through Chul's chest in a single merciless strike. The sound was sharp, final. Chul's eyes widened in disbelief. His breath hitched, and then his body went still. He fell to the snow, lifeless. The hunters gasped, their screams echoing against the frozen cliffs. Some turned their faces away, unable to watch. The death of a comrade, even one who had fallen into madness, cut deep. But Jinwoo did not waver. His expression was calm, almost cold, but his heart stirred with something heavier. He stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the snow, and he whispered the word. Arise. The world seemed to pause. Kim Chul's corpse shuddered. Darkness spread like ink, wrapping around his body, swallowing his features. The hunters cried out, some in horror, some in disbelief, as the shadows bent the man they once knew into something new. When the darkness cleared, the figure that stood was no longer Kim Chul. He was taller, broader, his body clad in heavy black armor, his head covered by a massive helm. In his hands he gripped a warhammer, so large it seemed to shake the ground with its weight. His eyes glowed faintly blue from within the helmet's slit. A new shadow soldier had been born, Iron. The hunters were silent, too stunned to speak. Their fear of Jinwoo deepened, but so did their awe. To raise a man, to command even death itself, what was Sung Jinwoo becoming? Iron did not hesitate. Without a thought, he raised his hammer and charged into the fray, roaring without voice, his strikes heavy enough to break both bone and earth. Beside him, Igris moved with elegance and precision, his crimson blades slicing through elves like fire through paper, and between them fought Jinwoo, quick, lethal, untouchable. The three fought as though they had been forged for this very moment, precision, strength, and speed woven together in a dance of destruction. Barca faltered. His strikes grew wilder, his smirk cracking into frustration. You dare defy me with the dead, he spat, his voice trembling with fury. You twist life into mockery. Jinwoo said nothing. His eyes, dark and unyielding, were fixed only on victory. Barca lunged, his blade flashing. Jinwoo dodged, barely, but the force of the strike shook him. His arm trembled from the impact. He needed an opening. And then he saw it. Jinwoo hurled his dagger, the blade spinning through the air. Barca deflected it with ease, his attention momentarily drawn away. But in that heartbeat, Iron's massive arms locked around him, pinning him in place. Barca thrashed, screaming curses in his icy tongue, but the shadow's grip was unbreakable. Iron raised his hammer. The hunters turned away. Some covered their ears. The sound was thunder. The ground split beneath the blow, and Barca's scream ended in silence. The elf leader's body crumbled, his icy armor shattered, his life extinguished. The battle was over. The forest, once alive with cries of war, was silent again. Only the sound of the wind returned, cold and hollow, carrying with it the memory of bloodshed. The low-rank hunters collapsed in exhaustion, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They had survived. They had lived through the nightmare. And Jinwoo stood amidst it all, his shadow army waiting silently behind him. When the red gate finally dissolved into blue, the world outside trembled with anticipation. Baek Yoonho and manager An stood ready, their eyes fixed on the portal. But it was not Kim Chul who stepped out. It was the low-rank hunters. Alive. Shaken. But alive. And leading them was Sung Jinwoo. Yoonho's heart twisted. He had expected Chul, he had expected the A rank, but instead, it was the boy, the so-called E rank, walking out with quiet strength. An, however, simply smiled faintly. I never doubted him, he murmured. Later, Yoonho confronted Jinwoo, his voice strained with anger and grief. What happened in there? What did you do to Chul? Jinwoo's eyes met his, calm, unflinching. His words were sharp, but not cruel. Instead of questioning me, be thankful for the hunters who still live. Yoonho froze. The truth of the words stung. Slowly, he lowered his head in apology. But for Jinwoo, there was no peace. He had killed again. 3 times now, he had ended human life with his own hands. No system message, no reward, no weapon could erase that weight. As dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Jinwoo walked home with Songyi by his side. She did not speak, but her quiet presence was steady, grounding him in a world that felt less and less his own. And waiting for him, bright-eyed and eager in gleaming new armor, was Yu Jinho. His grin was wide, his loyalty unshaken. To Jinho's surprise, Songyi stood beside them, ready to join. A new day had begun, but in Jinwoo's heart, the shadows whispered louder than ever. The line between man and monster grew thinner with each step he took, and with each shadow that obeyed his call.